Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Forum Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we are joined by Point Blank mastering instructor Anthony Chapman, who's armed with 5 mastering essentials. So today is all about mastering, and if you want to know a lot more about mixing, mastering, production, and even the inside of the music business, make sure you check out our courses at pointblanklondon.com. And remember, we are completely live today, so get your questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of FFL. Anthony, welcome back.
Oh, it's lovely to be back. I'm very good. I'm
Excellent.
very good, yeah.
So mastering, I mean, as we all know, it's becoming more and more DIY for various reasons. Which is no bad thing.
No, not at all.
But along the way, there are a couple of issues that come up time and time again.
Yeah.
Where people tend to stumble over, and that's what we're going to look at today.
So what I've tried to do today is come up with just 5 little kind of talking points, things that I find again and again, students or people I know or people I work with, when they want to get into doing a bit of mastering, that they hit again and again and again. And some of it is just ways of thinking. It's just, I think maybe you should think about this thing in a certain way. Some of it's practical stuff. So really what I'm going to do is try and just go through them. I've got a track here, which is a Point Blank label track, which I think is coming out next week,
I think on Tuesday or Wednesday
next week, by Fake Bear, this track will get down. Now this isn't the mastered version that I've got here. I did master the version that's coming out. But I'm just going to use this at a couple of points to demonstrate stuff. It's not like I'm going to master the whole track. I'm just going to use it as our kind of raw material to demonstrate a couple of things. It is a good track. It's got some issues, like pretty much every track that I ever master has. But, by no means is it fatal. I did manage to get it sounding really, really nice. It is a great track as well. It's a really, really good track.
Yeah, it's good.
Really nice rolling, kind of quite old school, but with modern sounds. Really, really nice. So what I want to start with is just, this is more just of a talking point. And I know for a lot of people it might seem quite obvious, but it is very important. So what we're talking about here really is, most of you people watching this, your interest in this is going to be mastering your own music, I don't think realistically anyone that would be watching this is thinking, I really want to become a full-time mastering engineer. To be honest, all the full-time mastering engineers I know, none of them ever thought, what I really want to do is become a full-time mastering engineer. Usually people just end up falling into it. They find they do more and more. They find they have a real talent for it, and then that ends up being what they're doing. But what we're talking about here is almost a sub art form within the art form of mastering, which is working on your own tracks, either for release or so that you can play them out and have them sounding the best they possibly can. So not everybody is going to be working in a room that is, beautifully acoustically treated. You're not necessarily going to have the most accurate and high quality monitoring. Now, do I think that's a problem? Not necessarily. It kind of depends on your expectations. It depends on what you want the end result to be. But what I really wanted to say is my number one sort of essential is knowing your environment, knowing what your environment sounds like, knowing what your monitors sound like. Even if you've been working in the same space for a long time, I find that if you just stop and say, you know what, today I'm just going to sit in my space and I'm going to listen to music that I know I really like the sound of, and just try to understand what it is my space and my monitoring is doing to that. Now, obviously some of us that are watching this, a lot of the time you might find you have to work on headphones. Headphones is never going to be ideal for mastering or for mixing. There are some interesting things out there. I don't know if anyone's seen the Waves NX, which I have to say I was really impressed with. I tried it out. It's very, very interesting. It's quite fun.
Like a modeling environment?
Yeah, but it's got the additional thing of it uses the camera in your computer to do head tracking. So basically, when you turn your head that way, this image goes that way, and you turn it that way. And I have to say, I sat down with it and listened to it for kind of 20 minutes, and I really started to get used to it. With all things like that, like the Focusrite VRM as well. I find when you first listen to it, you're like, what the hell is this? Like, it just sounds wrong. But it's really impressive. Like, and also what they're going to do soon is they're going to make a Bluetooth like sort of tag that you can put on your headphones.
With an accelerometer on it.
Yeah, so it doesn't need the camera. So you will just know exactly where you are. So it's very good. Would I master on that? Probably not. Would I use it if I needed to tweak a master? If I was away and I just had my laptop and I needed to tweak a master? Sure, yeah, I would do that. There's another plugin I really like called Redline Monitor as well, that's much more simple, but it's basically something that creates a phantom center on the master, so that if you're using headphones, it feels a bit more like monitors. Because the main problem with headphones is the drivers are right there, and they're both completely separate. So when your left ear, all you hear is the left speaker, as it were, and the right ear, all you hear is the right. Whereas with monitors, you hear a bit of both in both ears, which is really important. That's how we kind of process stereo ourselves. So that's really important. But to be honest, very simple acoustic treatment. I was saying to the guys earlier, my room that I use for a lot of stuff at home, I've got 4 Studio Spares acoustic panels like these, the ones we've got in here, and they're not expensive. I've got a lot of other detritus in my room, which soaks up a lot of stuff, several thousand records, pairs of trainers, stuff like that. So I'm kind of lucky, in inverted commas. But honestly, I truly believe that for most people, don't get hung up on thinking, oh, I can't possibly do a good job until I've got amazing treatment and amazing sounding room. I think it's more important to know what you've got, and if you need to do a little bit of treatment, go ahead, do that. But don't stop yourself from doing something thinking, oh, I couldn't possibly do it unless I had all this treatment. Honestly, you would be so surprised that so many records that I've worked on where some part of the process has been done in the most compromised environment, and then records have gone on to be big hits. You know, it really doesn't equate that you have to. Obviously, we would all love to be working in beautifully treated rooms all the time. Reality is we can't do it all the time, you know. So get to know your monitoring, get to know your environment. Yeah. Okay, it's really, really important. Now, the second one, which is sort of related to this, is knowing what makes a track ready for mastering, okay? And when you're working on your own stuff, that is really tough because you've got to maintain or introduce some amount of objectivity. Okay, we all understand the difference between objectivity and subjectivity. We need to be, obviously, when it's something you're making, you have a very, very subjective view of it. But when we get to the mastering stage, it's almost like you have to somehow separate yourself from it, at least a little bit, so you can step back from it and listen to it and think, is this ready? Is this ready to be mastered? There are also technical things. Obviously, everybody has probably heard me and other tutors go on about this all the time. Ideally, I kind of look for about 6 dB headroom in the master. Essentially, any headroom is better than none. So this brings me on to the track that I've got here, because there's some interesting things to look at here. Now, what I'm going to do is I've got BX meter here, which I'm going to put on the master channel, and I'm going to come back to this in a bit. But basically, if I run the track from like where the main drop comes in, so we can see here that we've got about 2.5 dB of headroom there. Now, what I really love about BX meter is the fact that it gives you this dynamic range meter in the middle as well. We've got a peak level, our RMS level, then we've got dynamic range. We've got our correlation at the top as well, which is telling us how wide the stereo image is. But the main thing is that when I look at the waveform, I can tell straight away when I got this track, I could tell there's some noticeable limiting going on, because you can just see there, whenever the track drops, it's very, very, very consistent in terms of level. Now, that I have to, as a mastering engineer, I have to make a little bit of a decision there. Can I work with that? Or do I need to go back to the artist and say, could you just rebounce it, take the limiter off? Because it could be that they took the limiter off, I would get it and it would sound completely different, and we would be back to square one.
Yeah, because some people mix into limiters from the very start.
Exactly.
That can define the whole track.
Exactly.
Sound, yeah.
What I ended up doing with this was I just went with it, and it worked. It's fine. I think if it had been limited much more than that, it could have been a problem. But at least I've got a little bit of headroom. At least I've got a little bit of headroom. Now, for me personally, I like to have that good 6 dB of headroom. So what I would do in this kind of situation, the first thing would probably be to turn this down by about another 3.5 dB in the clip. Whoops, not turn it up by 3.5 dB. And then, again, this is just me. This is just a habit that I'm in. I like to kind of commit to this. So what I'll do is I'll consolidate it.
Right.
And this is, this is doing it in Ableton Live. If it was in anything else, you'd bounce. If it was in Logic, you'd bounce it in place. This is just so that I know I've got a copy of this audio file with the level that I want. It just makes me feel a little bit better that I can't accidentally go into the clip and then mess with it and stuff like that. So it's,
I think what's also an important point is that yes, -6 is a good guide for the levels to be peaking at, but if your dynamic range isn't there,
exactly,
it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And that's the thing I was worried about with the limiting. I was worried about the effect it was going to have on the dynamic range.
It could be -12, but if it's limited,
but if we look here,
then it doesn't make a difference.
We're still getting about 5 dB dynamic range there. We've got our peak at around about 6 now. If we go to the second bit, which is where the bass comes in. So obviously the dynamic range reduces because the bass is taking up a lot more. But it's okay. It's okay. It's manageable.
Yeah.
So this is the thing you need to be aware of.
Dynamic range being the difference between the loudest and quietest part of the track.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So so this is, it's really, really important to try to be objective and to understand, when something is ready. It's very tough when it's your own stuff. I know, honestly. There's some projects that I've worked on where I've engineered it, if it's been like a band, then I've mixed it, and then they've said, oh, can you master it as well? And by the time I get to that point, I put it into whatever I'm using to do the mastering, and I listen to it and I go, well, it sounds fine.
Yeah.
Just put a limiter on it.
Sounds perfect.
There you go, just set the level, brilliant,
it,
done. Whereas, it's just because I can't hear it objectively at all. So I always like to try, when I'm working on something, I don't mind doing more than one step of the process, but ideally I don't like to do mixing and mastering. That's the two that I try to, but that said, all the time it still happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, that's, that's really, really important. Other things you want to check for with checking that the track's ready, you need to check phase coherency. So basically seeing, is the stereo image coherent? Is it going out of phase? If we look here, on our correlation meter here, that's totally fine. Basically, if it sits all the way up at the top, that's mono, and then anything past the midpoint to the left into this negative part, you're getting increasingly more and more out of phase.
Okay.
And as you get down there, what you'll find is if the track gets put into mono, you will lose some elements, So yeah, so that's really, really important. But again, that's kind of more of a mix issue, but it's something to know. Let's say you're mastering a track for somebody else, if you've got it and it's like the correlation's dipping down into the red, you probably want to go back and say, could you take a look? In fact, there's a track that I mastered for the Point Blank label, which had a really wide piano in it, and the piano was pulling the phase out. As soon as some of the beat dropped away, the piano would be playing and the correlation would just go wham over to the left. And I just found you put it in mono, and when it gets to that bit where the beat drops out, there's like this tiny little twinkly piano that's barely there at all. And I managed eventually, what I ended up doing was getting the artist to send me a bounce of the track without the piano and the piano. So basically I worked on the piano, I like monoed some of the frequencies and then overlaid that with the rest of the track, so yeah. Now, number 3, this is where we get into the sort of meaty stuff that I really wanted to sort of talk about. When we're mastering, especially dance music or kind of, electronic music in general, anything that's kind of beat heavy, nowadays we tend to focus on dynamics. That's what everybody talks about. That's what everybody thinks of as like the most important thing.
Yeah.
And it is important to a degree, but this in 2016, I've decided to be, I'm going to campaign for EQ.
The year of EQ.
Exactly, because more and more when I master, I'm just finding myself, I just get so happy when I use EQ to just reshape the track a little bit to get it balancing tonally the way that I want to do it. And I really, really feel like we need to look, dynamics processing, limiters, stuff like that, that's fine. But it's a blunt instrument, you know. Whereas EQ is so, you know, you can do so many things with it. So this essential for me is you've got to use great EQ that's going to work and is going to do the job for you. Now the factory EQs in Ableton and Logic are decent. You know, they're very decent. The one in Ableton I think is very good. It's very, very flexible. The one in Logic sounds good, but is not very flexible. You're kind of fixed with like what kind of shapes you have on each band and stuff like that.
So that's EQ8 and
EQ8,
channel EQ.
Yeah, EQ8 I think in live is great, okay? But I would say if you want to get into mastering, you're going to need at least one really good EQ in your arsenal. Now, in these Friday forums, I know somebody mentioned JC in the chat earlier, and JC is the guy who shout out to JC. JC is the first person who introduced me to BX Digital, the Brainworks MS mastering for EQ, and it's honestly every single master I've done ever since then has first thing in the chain is BX Digital, like every single one. Okay, now the reason I mention it is because quietly, I think, they've updated it to version 3. So this has been out for like the last couple of months. I upgraded immediately, like it was literally like no brainer. Like, you know, and the upgrade was super reasonable. It was like $49 upgrade. So, and basically they've been very careful to just add some really useful stuff. They haven't messed with it. They haven't ruined it. I do have a little issue with it at the moment, but it's not like fatal at all. So just to kind of recap, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this before in these sessions. So this is an MS EQ. So basically one side of the EQ here is the mono section, and this side here is the stereo section. So this is MS, mono stereo, mid and side, it sometimes gets called. And the mono section is basically everything in the track that's equal in both sides of the stereo image. The stereo section, or the sides, is everything in the track that's unequal in both sides of the stereo image. So just to illustrate what we're talking about, so if I solo the mono, so this is the mono. Now in a dance track, this is what I would expect. The vast majority of the track is going to be in there. The really important stuff, the bass, the kick, maybe the snare, you know, it's all going to be in there. Now let's have a listen to the side.
Not a lot going on. Yeah,
but it's really important. There's reverb is in there. Reverb is always in the sides. Well, stereo reverb is always in the sides. There's a shaker there. And there's a little bit of percussion and stuff like that. So, you know, it's very important. So basically this track at the moment is quite mono, it's quite narrow. Now you do want it to be relatively narrow, but I think maybe we can work that a little bit. Now one of the really important things I hesitate to say this because last time I mentioned this in a Friday Forum Live, it kind of went off in the comments. But anyway, it's generally accepted, let's put it like that, you really want low frequencies to be in mono, because low frequencies mechanically are very tough to reproduce in stereo, and they're very, very susceptible to phase problems. The analogy I always use with students is low frequencies are kind of big and slow, and they get picked off before anything else because they're kind of getting left behind. So if there's phase problems, they're the first ones that get hit. So what we do with BX Digital is we've got this control here, the mono maker, and for this track, I'm going to turn it up to about 100 hertz. So basically now everything from 103 hertz down is in mono. Now if I solo the stereo, and if I turn this up, so basically I'm gradually taking out a bunch of the stuff in the stereo field. You can see there I've turned that all the way up, so it's completely mono. So I'm going to leave it around about 100 hertz. I don't want to go crazy. Sometimes on some tracks I'll go up to 200. I said that to Doug, one of the other mastering tutor here, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. But I was saying, but I said to him, like, bear in mind that most of what I'm mastering at the moment is kind of very much club music. So, you know, you kind of need that. If I was mastering like acoustic stuff, I would barely use it at all. You know, it's because it's meant for a completely different listening environment. Yeah. So what I've done here is I've made it mono up to around about 100 hertz. Now, things that they've added in BX3, we've got this thing here, dynamic EQ. And basically, on the previous version, we had a de-esser there. But what they've done is they've changed it so that you can basically set the frequency you want, and if you turn it anti-clockwise, it will reduce that frequency as it detects it coming in. If you turn it clockwise, it will increase that frequency as it comes in. So it's actually something you can use for a little bit of a kind of a, if you needed to, you could use it as a little transient boost. So if I solo this.
I mean, it essentially is a single band compressor.
Yeah.
And a very tight frequency range.
Yeah. But basically, if we turn it to the
expander.
Yeah, it's exactly. Turn it to the right, it's an expander. Turn it to the left, it's a compressor. So you can hear there. There we go.
So it's not just boosting everything; it's only boosting things across.
It's just grabbing that snare. So if I take that outside, it's very subtle. But it's very useful. To be honest, for me, a lot of the time when I'm mastering, I tend to use it the other way. So if something's quite harsh in the sibilant range, I'll use it the other way, but I actually quite like a little bit of a boost there to kind of snap it up a little bit. Yeah. So that's a new thing. Other new things, they've changed up here. So if I turn on my high pass here, I can choose between 6 dB an octave or 12, which is great because one of the things that I used to struggle with BX Digital version 2 was that I found the high pass was much too slow. So I would often use another EQ to do a fairly steep, because with club music, a lot of the time, you want to go, look, everything, I really want to kind of filter out a lot of stuff up to like 25, 30 hertz. And the standard high pass on the old version of this was just too slow. So, you know, let's say I'm going to go up to about 35 hertz here. And then we've also got this bass shift here. This isn't new, but they have tweaked it. So you see when I turn this up, see it gives us that bass boost, but it also gives you like a complementary low mid cut as well. So that's very sweet. Yeah,
you know,
it's very
even
sweet.
When you hit it full,
yes,
it never becomes too honky.
Exactly. Now the one thing I'm noticing here is I'm kind of, you know, as I'm adding stuff, I'm starting to clip a little bit on the output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the gain on the way in down a bit. And the other thing I want to do is, because it's so mono, I actually want to turn up the stereo width a bit. And what the stereo width does is it turns up the sides. So all it is like basically if you turn it over 100%, it's turning up the sides section. So, you know, it's quite a good subtle way of doing it. So see if I whack it up there to like 400%, you can really hear that like percussion that's in the side. But even if we just go like 150%, that'll just give us a little bit of extra wideness, okay? But basically what I'm talking about when I'm saying about using EQs to do the kind of lion's share of what it is you want to do tonally, is just I feel like, you know, for example, I think we need a little bit of, it needs to be brighter, you know, it needs to sparkle a little bit more. So even just there, that presence shift straight away, that's really, really nice. But I can team that up with, you'll notice that at the moment when I click on the frequency, it solos. So basically I can kind of fine tune exactly where I want to go. So, you know, if I want, I can try and get in there. But one of the really important things I find is cuts. You know, a lot of the time you'll find there'll be areas where you need to make a cut to just keep it tonally balanced. And it could be that where it was mixed, the environment wasn't completely perfect and they couldn't really hear it. Now, on the subject of that, in BX Digital version 3, if I turn the gain all the way down, it becomes a notch filter. So this is really handy because basically we can just use this to find that kind of troublesome frequency. Sometimes in club tracks like this, I'll find a sort of dissonant frequency, you know, there's quite a big harmonic there, but it's actually out of key with the track, and I can use the notch to kind of basically get rid of it. So, you know, that's very, very useful as well. And I've not even really touched the stuff in the sides either. You know, again, very often I would just add a bit of the presence shift there. So if we So you see how I've kind of scooped a bit of the mid-range out a bit there.
That boxiness in the kick is gone.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit quieter, so if I like turn this up a little bit. Yeah, but basically, BX Digital, I cannot recommend highly enough.
All the Brainwork stuff is great.
All the Brainwork stuff's fabulous, especially for mastering, especially if you're into mid-side. I mean, to be honest, mid-side in mastering for me is one of the most really important tools that you've got available.
We actually had a question from Serban Stiroradov. He's asking how essential is mid-side EQ in the mastering process?
I think I think for electronic music, for club music, it's really, really useful because this idea of mono compatibility is so important. If you work in mid-side, you can be very sure that you're going to get that mono compatibility. In case you're not sure what I'm talking about, the vast majority of clubs where people will listen to music are not like one big box room with a sound system at one end. They're usually like lots of little rooms and there's one speaker here, one speaker there. So a lot of it is in mono. You're going to be hearing a lot of it in mono. Sometimes it's just certain frequencies will be in mono or certain areas of the venue will be in mono.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely essential that your track works in mono. If you've got something like that piano I was talking about, if that's out of phase, someone's going to play the track in the club and it's not going to be there, or it's going to be greatly reduced. So it's very, very important. But I mean, for me personally, MS is essential for this kind of mastering because it means I can control what is going to come out of those boxes in the club. Yeah. So, yeah. So I mean, BX Digital, I cannot recommend highly enough. Little tip: if you're patient, Christmas. In December,
That's very patient.
Plugin Alliance always do their advent calendar. And basically they do a plug-in really cheap every day. And the last 3 years, BX Digital has been in there. And I think when I bought it, I got it on that deal and I got it for like $99, where it's normally like $300. So, see how you go. I'd say subscribe to their mailing list because they're very good with deals and stuff like that. Other EQs that I use in mastering just to kind of, not be completely focused on Brainworks. FabFilter Pro Q, which is really fantastic as well. Most of my masters have BX Digital at the start and FabFilter a little bit further down the line.
Yeah, there was some people in the chat talking about FabFilter. So
yeah, absolutely love FabFilter stuff. The other thing is as well, and I know again this is a JC special, is Lufticus, which honestly I use it in every master because I do all my.
It's the Marg EQ clone, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically like Brainworks do a really. Oh no, Plugin Alliance do a really good Marg EQ, like an official one. Yeah. But
basically, as well.
All I ever use this for is that high boost. All that stuff is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful, completely free. Search for Lufticus, it's really, really great. Okay. Now, so EQ, try and make it your focus in terms of what you're going to do to the track. Now, the next thing I was going to say is, the next sort of essential, number 4, is basically thinking about dynamics and thinking about compression, okay? And essentially, I think one of the most important things is don't compress if you don't need to compress. Now, this track is a classic example, okay? I don't need to compress this track at all. It's 100% compressed, limited already. Like I said, I kind of took judgment on it thinking, I can work with this, it'll be fine. But there's really, really no need. There's really, really no need to at this stage. Now, in terms of compression for mastering, shout out to FabFilter as well, because Pro C2 I think is a really good one. But again, on the freebie tip, and I know I've mentioned this before, I cannot get enough of
Tokyo Dawn.
Tokyo Dawn's Kotelnikov. Totally free. I really ought to buy this because there's a version you can pay for. There's like a slightly better version, and I've probably used this on like 100 masters now. So I really feel like I ought to buy it. It's only like $30. Yeah,
buy a drink sometime.
So, but this is really fantastic. So I wouldn't need to use it on this track, but this is the one I would say to investigate. The couple of sort of really unique. There's one really unique feature on this. I mean, I'm sure there is another compressor that does this, but I've never seen a plugin that does it.
The 2 release times.
Is the 2 release times, the 2 release circuits. So we've got the peak release and the RMS release. So basically what you can do is you can set it, just for demonstration purposes. If I set this so that basically when the kicks hit, we're getting the little blue light there on the peak. And what's happening is, for that first for that initial peak, we've got that 80 milliseconds release. Then after the peak, it switches to that 220 milliseconds. So basically you get a bit of fast release and then a slower release. So it kind of smooths it out really nicely. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I like as well, you can change the sensitivity in stereo. So for a lot of club tracks, I would probably like bring it right down. So it's basically compressing the whole track in mono, applying the same compression to both sides. Whereas as you turn it up higher and the little icon starts to show you how wide you're making it, it will differentiate slightly what it's doing on each side. So
okay.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's it's free. You can't really go wrong. They've got some other really cool. Their EQ's pretty good. There's a dynamic EQ as well, which I've not had a chance to play with yet, but that looks pretty cool.
One of our most popular FFLs ever is about free plugins. You can watch it after this one.
Fantastic.
And it has features a lot of Tokyo dance stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's really, really brilliant stuff. So so thinking about compression, just know when to use it and when not to use it, because it's in mastering. Trust me, in mastering, it's not the case that you would always have to do it.
Especially if you've mixed in. I mean, obviously, all the fundamental of audio science is don't mix into a limiter, don't put a compressor in the master bus, but everyone does. Well, a lot of people do. So if you have done that, you don't have to compress it again for the sake of it. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I see people talking about ozone in the chat room.
Don't want to distract you.
I know I'm the official point blank ozone guy. I'm the go-to ozone guy. I still use it, but I should clear it up. I still use it. I don't use it standalone, but I use some of the modules, and some of the modules in Ozone 7, the compressor, the exciter. I still love the exciter. Like if you've got a track that needs a little bit of aggression, it's absolutely fantastic. So don't worry, guys. I haven't abandoned it yet. So the final essential is related to what we've just been talking about, and it's that kind of that sort of golden thing, which is the overall volume. Thinking about limiting, thinking about how loud you make it. And what I basically wanted to say is, the thing I want everybody to think about is you should only make the track as loud as it needs to be, okay? Again, this is something else that causes terrible ructions in the comments when we talk about stuff like this. But, I really believe that for most tracks, there is a volume that it should be at. You want it to sound good, you want it to sound loud and proud and have lots of energy. And there is definitely, I think, for most tracks, there is a natural point that you get to where it's like, yeah, that is right, okay? And I think I still see lots of commercial masters, especially of dance music, especially of kind of like big commercial dance music, that I just think are appalling, But I don't blame the mastering engineers, because I know from experience that that's what you get asked for. And when somebody's paying me to master their track, if they say, oh, I want it to be about -3 dB RMS, I've got to try and do it, I'll say to them, are you sure? Because I think it will sound a lot better if we, it's so funny in 2016, it's like being conservative on the level of a dance track is like -6, which is, to me still is insanely loud, but it's a real shame, because I think in a few years' time, everyone will be going back. If you think about now, people there's lots of compilations and lots of nights dedicated to like drum and bass from the 90s and stuff like that. If you imagine, go forward 20 years from now, it's going to be a nightmare, because people are going, oh yeah, let's play all that great 2010s dance music, and it all sounds completely destroyed, and people are going to be like, oh my God, what were you doing? So I truly think it's important to just find that natural point of loudness. Now, I have a little sort of mantra I have in my head, which is that -10 dB RMS is where loud begins, okay? So for me, that's always been my kind of, point where I know, okay, if I'm doing a master and it's -10 dB RMS, that is loud. -10 dB RMS usually is good loud, but it's loud. Everything beyond that, you have to be massively careful that it's appropriate for the track. And don't get me wrong, some tracks will sound amazing louder than that, but not everything will. Now, So there's two things related to this that I think are really important. That's your metering and also the kind of final limiter and stuff like that you're going to be using, okay? So just to come back to BX meter, remember what we're talking about here is the RMS level, okay? So this is this one here, which is the inner one. So at the moment, the RMS level, we're getting about between minus 12, minus 11 dB most of the time. So remember, RMS is root mean square. It's basically averaged out. It's the averaged out level. It's really the only way you can actually tell how loud something is. You know, you can say how loud a kick drum is from the peak level, but if you want to know how loud a track is, you've got to have the RMS value. Now, one thing I find a lot lately is that something that helps me to get to where is right is using, and I know I showed this last time I was here, is K-Clip, which is the Kazrog clipper. This is really cheap. I think it's $10. Oh, I think it's normally $20, but I think they've had an offer on for months where it's 10. And all it is just a very simple circuit where you turn the volume up and you can decide how hard or soft you want the clip to be when it hits that 0 dB. Right. It oversamples internally. I always leave that on 16 times. So basically, if it goes 16 times higher sample rate so that it tries to protect against some artifacts and stuff like that. And then you've got an output and you've also got a guard which you can set so that it only goes up to a certain level. So for me personally, I would normally put that on minus 0.3, okay? But what I'm gonna do first is just look at what my headroom is. So about 5 dB, okay? So if I go back to my clipper here, I'm going to turn this up by 5 dB. And if we look at my meter again, so you can see it's just gotten over, just. Okay? So I'm just at that point where it's just at the clipping point. So what I'll do is, I'm just going to back that off, just like a tiny amount. I'm going to turn the guard on. So now if we look at the master, so this should, but you can see there, it's stopping it at minus 0.3. And that minus 0.3 is, a lot of people argue that we don't need to do it anymore, but I'm kind of in the habit. I just like to leave that little...
There is an interpolation if you really convert from
Exactly.
And sometimes add a little point.
Exactly. Yeah, like you get inter-sample clips, especially with MP3 conversion. I mean, I'm very hesitant to base what I do in mastering on what happens at MP3 conversion, because I'm like, that's lossy. That's not, yeah. Well, no, it's not so much to the present, it's nothing to do with me. You know, you guys, if you want to listen to it, AAC compression, go ahead. You know, I have to master at the optimum quality, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not like slagging it off or anything. You know, it's there, that piano.
Yeah, like I was just
I knew it was going out of phase, I just noticed, yeah. I've got this wasn't the track that I had, but I definitely fixed this for the master. Possibly, fact fans, with the Ozone stereo imager.
There you go.
But anyway, so I've got K-Clip set up now so that it's basically loud up to the point where it's, you know, up to the top of the clipping level within minus 0.3. And RMS wise, forget the one here, we've got the bass. So that's given us about between minus 8 and minus 7 dB. That sounds great to me. You know, that kind of level for me is completely fine. And I find lately that sometimes using K-Clip makes me make better decisions because it doesn't have the interface showing you exactly what it's not. I love Pro L. Pro L's amazing, the FabFilter Pro L. But sometimes this is better because it doesn't
have metering.
Yeah, I'm listening to it. I'm looking at my final meter and I'm listening to it. I'm not looking at the graph of what's happening. The other thing obviously we can do here is I'll go 20% soften. Basically what that's going to do is, as the wave goes into the clipping point, the soften is going to gradually soften that before it hits the clipping point. So it should protect against distortion.
Kay, it's a good question actually. K100 is asking, why don't you just use utility? What's the difference between increasing the gain using K-Clip?
The difference with K-Clip is that we've got the facility to change the way it clips. Okay, there's a really good article on their website where it shows you visually what happens. But basically, as we turn up that soften circuit, rather than the wave just going bang into the clipping point, what it does, it's kind of like soft knee. It's a bit like soft knee compression, so it'll kind of curve into it like that, which protects against distortion. Also, you know, we've got our ceiling point there. So this is kind of doing a different job to utility. Utility, you can turn it up, you can hit the clip, but this is going to sound a lot better, because if you just hit the clipping point in Ableton, that's just, you know, all bets are off. Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah. Whereas with this, there's some predictability. So
okay, cool.
Cool. So, I mean, I don't know, is there any questions out there? I feel like I've just been talking at everybody for a very long time.
Yeah, it's good though. I like it. Keep them coming, because we've got some time to answer them. Albero's asking, I heard boosting 3 kilohertz is good because many harmonics are in that range.
Yeah, 3 kilohertz is generally a really good range to be paying a lot of attention to. You're right, a lot of sounds will have harmonics in that kind of range. And it's 3 kilohertz is, I would say, typically, if you think of any listening system or environment, you're going to hear a lot.
Laptop speakers, everything.
So it's really important. But 3 kilohertz is also, you know, if you're in front of a speaker and something plays really loud and you go, oh, ow, yeah. 3 kilohertz. So it's basically, you've just got to be careful there. In a mastering scenario, you would be basically wanting to pay attention to that, but not necessarily just massively boost it, but you might, a little bit of a boost might help. So,
give it your attention.
Yeah,
give it your
definitely.
Time. Someone's asking about FJX, which is FGX, which
FGX,
is Slate Digital.
It is. I've used it a couple of times. I don't have it myself.
Okay. Big fan of Slate stuff.
I know people who really love it. I use a lot of Slate stuff, but actually not the sort of signal processing stuff. I use the drum stuff. So I use the Platinum Drummer and Slate Trigger. Do you know what? Slate Trigger in dance music, I think, is actually really, really useful.
Drum replacement's always been seen as like a rock thing.
Yeah, but I've used it. I've mixed dance tracks for people, and they've sent me rendered audio, and then the kick drum. I'm thinking, I could need a little bit more of that. Just put Trigger on it, and then just put whatever sample I want in, and Trigger just reads the velocity of the samples really, really well. So yeah, there's a little tip there for you.
So Foenzi's asking, if the club system is in stereo, even the subs, would you still put the sub in mono or phase? Does this cause phase problems at the venue?
Generally speaking, the club system, the subs would be mono. I would be very surprised if the subs in a club system would be stereo, because I don't know if you've ever, if you've seen like a sort of big home cinema system. The sub is always off to one side to try and take care of the phase. So you know you have the 5.1 speakers, and then the sub is put off to one side because that prevents phase problems. If the sub was in the middle, you're going to cause a lot of phase problems with the other speakers. In a club system, I would generally expect they use a crossover, and the crossover will basically say, oh, these frequencies are lower, let's make that mono. But I would say, you know, generally speaking, the most important thing is those real low frequencies, make sure they're in mono, but also just keep an eye on everything else. Like I said, in that track you saw in the piano there, when it broke down, it was starting to go into the red, so yeah.
Yeah, good point. Manchester Music has asked 2 questions. First one is, beyond using a mastered reference track, is there software that you can use to see how much gain their unmastered track needs depending on the genre or output format?
There are, there are alternate metering systems and standards. I personally don't use them. I know lots of people who do, you know, like the K-weighted metering, there's all these different, so I'm just using standard peak and RMS metering, but some people use different standards for metering, different calibrations, and they say that gives you a better idea of how loud something should be. I think reference tracks is going to be your best resource, along with your ears, and just like, and I hate saying that because I know people go, roll their eyes, but it's just like, you've just got to learn. You've just got to learn what sounds right.
Yeah, you know? Magic AB from Sample Magic.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think there's another one as well. I think I can't remember who. Somebody else did a similar thing, but Magic AB, they've updated it recently, and that's really, really useful.
Yeah.
The thing with mastering though that I always struggle with is. The thing with mixing is that reference tracks for mixing is like, how do you get unmastered reference tracks? You know, that's the thing that always troubles me a little bit with mixing, when people are going, oh, I want to try and get it to sound like this reference track's up, but that's mastered.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's learning that, the mixed sound and the mastered sound, right? You know, but yeah.
Also for Manchester Music, which you kind of touched on at the start, but should we bother mastering our own music without top-shelf monitors in a top-shelf room? Aren't we just amplifying our mistakes if we mix and master in the wrong environment?
It basically depends on a lot of factors. I would honestly insist that, you know, there's no reason why you can't do a really good job. And I think a lot of people would be surprised if they saw the places that big records, even relatively recently, they were made. You know, I mean, I've worked on tracks. I've got friends. I've got a friend who had a number. I mean, it was in the 90s, but I got a friend who had a #1 record in the 90s. It was like 8 weeks at #1, and it was made on a Tascam 8-track cassette. You know, I don't think he even had monitors at the time. You know, so it's like I'm not saying that's what you should do.
Who was it?
That's that White Town.
Right,
You'll remember White Town, yeah. And you know, yeah, all the vocals recorded on a Tandy PZM mic, were modified to have a 9-volt battery on it. You know, it was all like proper DIY. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm saying that what we've got now, even if all you've got is Logic or Ableton, all the factory stuff in that's so much better. And then, you know, I honestly believe that even modestly priced monitors, if you put them on some decent stands and you think about where you're putting them in the room, ideally, I always think front-ported monitors for sort of small setups for like home studios are always going to be better, because you don't have the bass firing out the back or out of the case, causing problems in the room. I think, you know, it's definitely worth doing. Like I said, but if the first point I made, which was know your environment and know what it sounds like and know what the results are, and then you will be able to do good work. I think it's definitely worth doing it. You know, it's a fool's errand, I think, to say, oh no, I can't master until I've got an amazing room and amazing monitors.
Yeah, cool. So we probably got time for maybe one or two more. Tris421's asking, with mid-side, I always find I mess up the vocals as they are occupying a large range. Any way to avoid this, or is it just about being subtle?
Right. I guess it depends on the processing of the vocals in the mix, because if you send them to a reverb or like a ping pong delay or anything like that, that's going to push them out into the sides. So basically, if you're going to do any kind of tweaks in the sides, that's going to push all those effects up. Traditionally, what we would expect with a lead vocal would be that it would be mono. You know, that's what we'd usually, but of course that's when it's like completely dry. So I'd say possibly if you're having problems, go back and look at what you've done in the mix. I'll tell you one thing that some people do, which can cause difficulties if you start to do MS, is if you do some kind of like widening on the vocals. So if you use like a chorus, or I really like Microshift, the Sound Toys plugin. That's great, but you've got to be aware that if you do that, you're kind of taking that mono signal of the vocal and you're creating duplicates that are in the sides. So if then you get to master and you turn up the sides, suddenly you've got this like extra vocal coming up. Exactly. So I would say go back and have a look, see what you're doing, you know. I think one of the really important things about mastering, if it's your own music, is don't be afraid to have a go at mastering it. And if you think something's not working, just try going back and tweaking that thing in the mix and then try it again. Funny enough, today on the way down here today, I had an email off somebody I do lots of mastering for, and I just sent him an email saying, you know this new record you've got me mastering, one of the tracks, it sounds like there's a Geiger counter running through the whole track really loud. Is that deliberate? Because I was worried it was like glitched. And he's like, no, that's deliberate. Then he got the master, he went, oh, it does sound really loud now. So I just said, look, just go back in the mix, turn it down a bit, send it to me, and I'll just run it through the same settings, and then you can kind of compare which one works better. And that's just sometimes what happens, you know. For me as a mastering engineer, when I'm doing commercial work, it's very usual for me to liaise with the artist, you know.
And that's something that those pesky automated web services can't provide.
Exactly.
And one more question from Stefano Ginta is reverb on the master, question mark.
Oh, that's
yes or no?
That's a very ozone. What was that? It would be ozone 5 and before question.
Because they took it out, didn't they?
They did. Yeah. I mean, I can understand their thinking there, just kind of sort of focusing on the meat and potatoes of it, because obviously if you want to put reverb and the master, you could just add it yourself. I've done it, you know, not so much with dance music, with sort of stuff that's a bit more spacious. I often like when I used to use Ozone 5 a lot, I would use it and low pass it quite a lot. So it wasn't like fizzy, it's just adding a bit of dimension. But I tend to, in mixes, do a lot of a similar kind of approach. Like I'll use like a convolution reverb like IRL and I don't know, a hi-hat or something like that I just feel needs to be in a bit of space. I'll just put it in there. So rather than doing it in the mastering stage, generally at the moment I'll do stuff like that in the mix. But there's no reason not to do it. You've just got to be absolutely sure. The other thing to remember as well is reverb is in the sides. So, you know, just be aware, because if then after that you're doing mid-side processing, if you turn up the sides, you're going to be turning up the reverb.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And if you're putting it straight on the master and using a dry wet control, every percentage increase is a percentage decrease of the dry.
Exactly.
Rather than running it in parallel.
Yeah. So if you're going to do that, a lot of the time it's better to do it on two separate channels and like properly sort of, you know, balance it up like that way. Dry and wet controls are never ideal for stuff like that. So it's just not precise enough. So.
Yeah, nice one. So unfortunately we are out of time for today's FFL. Hopefully you got plenty of inspiration for the weekend, but if you want to learn more about mastering, mixing and all that good stuff, make sure you check out our courses at pointblanklondon.com. We'll be back soon for another FFL, so we'll see you then. Cheers.